upon us. So let me officially welcome our audience who's steadily signing in to the presentation tonight. This is, gosh, the fourth public Zoom event we've had. We've had a couple of private review sessions, all-day sessions. We are having one more Zoom panel event for Click this weekend, which is tomorrow at 1. It's called Photography While Black, which is borrowing its name from the term driving while black. I usually try to keep panels to what we're looking at right here, about 4 people, maybe an hour, but we've got probably twice as many people, and we're giving ourselves 2 hours tomorrow to cover this very broad subject. We've got young and old. We've got folks who have been doing this for decades. We've got Kennedy Carter, who's the National Jury Fence winner and is just taking off. She's in her very early 20s. We've got men and women. We've got journalists. We've got fashion editorial workers. We've got a couple of curators on hand. I think this is going to be a really interesting panel discussion tomorrow. So I have put in the chat the link to our website. If you go to the Click Academy section there, you can still register for that. I also put the live stream link to Facebook. So, you know, if you have a smart TV and you're tired of looking at your computer screen, and you can do that on your TV, you can sit on your couch and watch all of this. So, and then all of this will be recorded and posted again on YouTube for you to share with all your friends who missed it. We're in the midst of what we call Click 120, which is the 5 days of intense programming during our month-long festival. As always, there are some sponsors we need to thank. 2 of our long-term sponsors are Castle House and Contech, and that's because of Frank Conhouse and Ellen Castley. Oddly enough, right now, I'm sitting in a conference room at 21C Museum Hotel, which has been a long-time sponsor for us. Due to COVID, not as much programming here, but they've graciously given me this room to work out of here today to host this event. We also have had great support this year from the Mary Duke Biddle Foundation, from the City of Durham. There are a number of individual sponsors, Alan Thomas Jr. among others. We've had contributions from Dickerson Fencing, who helped to construct and donate the fencing for the fence, which is meandering its way through downtown Durham. I got to thank Holden before he even starts. Holden has been a tremendous help in helping us form this. And I got to say, here's today, we're doing a panel on historic processes. And I got to say, it was tough to pick because I do like to keep it to about 4 people. And Holden, would you agree? I think we're lucky that we have a lot of folks near us who are doing all kinds of different historic processes, and any one of them would have been great on this panel.
North Carolina is blessed with a lot of historic process workers and alternative printers. I think we have a real richness there. You're right.
Yeah, and we have great schools like Penland and other places that really support this. I know East Carolina University, you could learn almost any process you want down there. In any case, I'm gonna get out of the way here really quickly. Please tune into other stuff. We will have some other events scattered throughout the month, but not as intense as it has been the last 5 days. But thank you all our panelists for joining us. Holden, I'm going to throw it to you. I'm going to sign off. What I recommend to all of our audience members, as we're going through, if you can continue chatting with one another in the chat window, but if you have a question for our panelists, send it to me via the Q&A button, and at the end, I'll reappear and we'll ask some questions around the room. I think that's all I have, Holden.
All right, that's great. And also, might dip into the Q&A during the talk.
Sure.
Something particularly poignant pops up. I want to thank everyone for showing up today. I'm going to go around the room and introduce the people that are here, and then read kind of a general statement, and we'll kick off the discussion. And I'll start with Jill Enfield, who you can see. Jill Enfield is a fine art photographer, an author, an educator, who began working with and lecturing about infrared film and hand painting in the 80s. She currently teaches alternative process photography at Parsons School of Design. Her work has been included in Here is New York, commemorating the 5th anniversary of 9/11, and has been a legend behind the lens for Nikon. She is best known for being author of Jill Enfield's Guide to Photographic Alternative Processes, which is widely used and regarded throughout the photographic community. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Holden.
And we also have Mark Osterman here today. He began his study of historical photographic processes while at Kansas City Art Institute in the 70s. He taught fine art photography at the George School in Newtown, PA for 20 years, and in 1998 joined the George Eastman House as a process historian. Mark has been the star of a traveling medicine show. He's a Model T enthusiast and once traded a Leica for a book on colloidal. Welcome, Mark.
Wow, thank you.
And we also have Adam Finkelston here today. He is an artist, a publisher, and an educator based in Prairie Village, Kansas. Mr. Finkelsten is the owner, publisher, and co-editor of the quarterly photography and printmaking magazine, The Hand, a magazine for reproduction-based art. His work has been shown in solo exhibitions as well as group and juried exhibitions throughout the United States and internationally. And lastly, we welcome John Allen. Hi, John. Who is an interdisciplinary artist and educator interested in materiality and perception. John's MFA project involved using painting with light and pinhole photography to capture abstract images in caves. He has taught at Maryville College and is currently the instructor of drawing, photography, art history, and the history of photography at Pellissippi and Walter State Community Colleges. More recently, his interest in analog photography has led to the collaboration of a community art nonprofit called The Big Camera, which is a featured part of Click 2020. And I welcome you all here today, and I'm just going to read a short little statement, and then we will start discussing things. Historic process is no longer an asterisk in the annals of photographic practice. It's as relevant today as the day Henry Fox Talbot first applied salted water and silver nitrate to paper in the 1830s. It would later find expression in the cyanotype work of people like Anna Atkins in the 1850s, the same era that the albumen print became the dominant photographic printing process for the next 50 years. In between 1890 and today, a plethora of printing methods, including calotype, Van Dyke, bichromate, oil print, platinum print, palladium print, all became avenues of photographic expression. The alchemical marriage of a photographic idea and process can take a photographer's vision to its fullest expression. With that being said, I want to start with the first question, which is, where did each of you first encounter an alternative or historical process? And I'll start with Mark.
I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, and so I used to go to the flea markets when I was a kid, and so I saw ambrotypes and tintypes and all sorts of old photographs when I was a boy. But it wasn't until I was in college when I saw a Time Life book that had a chapter on historic processes, and I decided that I would make a daguerreotype. And so I made a daguerreotype back in 1973 or 74 at the Kansas City Art Institute.
Jill?
I went to the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, New York, and B. Nettles was there and Joan Lyons, and got to learn from them. And then when I went to NYU, I took a class in alternative processes, is what they called it at the time, and never looked back. I just loved it.
So what was the first process you actually looked at? Was it like a salt print or do you remember?
It was actually a cyanotype, and then we did things with, we had an old Xerox machine, and we were playing around with the Xerox machine. So I guess it was a type of carbon print.
Neat.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. But since then, I have found some old dry plates that were done by my family. And so I have old family images that are just fascinating to me.
I am sitting here looking at an albumen print of my great-great-grandfather that I keep on my desk, so I get it.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see.
Adam, how about you? Where did you first encounter historic process in the wild?
Actually, my first one was a cyanotype. We did a little cyanotype and Van Dyke printing when I was at the Kansas City Art Institute. So Mark and I have that in common. But I think I really became more aware of it actually when the Nelson Museum, which I'm representing here, when they had their block building was open, they had an enormous exhibition of American photography. And they had just a really, really wide array of processes and prints in a lot of different processes. And that was, I think, really when my mind kind of cracked open to all of the different possibilities and just really became fascinated, and went back to class or went back to the studio and tried to make some of those things that I saw. But cyanotype was really where I really got started.
Sounds great. And John, how about you?
So my grandfather was actually a professional portrait photographer in mostly black and white, large format kind of stuff. But he also had a business restoring old photos. So I still have piles and piles of his, photo restoration projects. So and there are all kinds of ages and processes, but I remember just being seeing those images and being so captivated by those works. But later on, even in high school, I was lucky to have a really great. My photography teacher would show her own work, and she was doing all kinds of alternative stuff like Polaroid emulsion lifts, and so I remember seeing that kind of work and realizing that was sort of my interest in photography.
That's great. I wanted to ask this question, which is, it is said that nostalgia is the enemy of good art. And I would contend that historic process is a tool to extend an artist's vision and not a precious throwback. What do you think about that? And I'm going to start with Jill, since she's nodding her head.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I really don't like the idea of people just talking about process. I don't think it's about process. It's about the image. And so you need to look at your work and decide, how does this image need to be seen? Or how do I need to make this image to make it be what I want it to say? And it doesn't matter what the process is. It's about the image. And so if you have something that just gives you a feeling of nostalgia but doesn't say anything to you, then it's not successful. It has to reverberate something in you. And so that's it. I don't think it matters what you do. I think that you can do any process. And what's so terrific now is that you have, the word toolbox is so overused these days, but that's what it is. I mean, you just have these choices of being able to, a painter has choices. Are you going to use acrylic or are you going to use oil? And I don't understand why this question always comes up more with photography, I guess, because it's more of, you start with a process rather than your hand. But I think that's for me, what's important is being able to utilize my hand in making an image that might start with something technical.
It's a terrific answer. How about you, John?
It's an interesting question. I feel like I've been thinking about this idea of nostalgia as kind of in a history of photography class. A lot of my students, I'm realizing, are kind of coming of age and don't have this nostalgic relationship that I do to any kind of analog process. And I'm really wondering with this generation, what will be their motivation? Because I am partly motivated out of kind of nostalgia for these physical objects that have memories and connotations for me. So I'm interested what their relationship is going to be in these kinds of process into the future. And it's a mixed bag. I think if it's just creating a nostalgic tone, I think I agree with Jill that it has to do something beyond that. But I do think nostalgia is pretty seductive sometimes, and I think that's okay.
It's interesting. It's really interesting that you could say that there's a whole generation that has no memory or nostalgia for these processes as in the same context that somebody my age would, and that's fascinating. So it probably feels like a brand new playground to them versus somewhere that's been heavily trod. Adam, what do you say?
Well, I agree that what I think was so wonderful about these processes is that it gives artists so many ways that they can manipulate an image and make something unique, make something theirs, which I think is often lost in digital work when everything everything kind of has a similar feel. I mean, obviously you can manipulate that somewhat, but I think that these processes really push the medium forward. But I think that they also give the ability to have some context. Teaching, I teach at the high school level as well and in college students, and I think that they really enjoy learning the history of the processes, and it gives them some context as to what the artistry of photography. It's not just pushing buttons and touching screens. So I think I don't know if that's nostalgia necessarily, but it gives them some historical context and an appreciation for the artistry of it. But I definitely think that nostalgia, just for nostalgia's sake, I would agree with John that there's some seduction there as well. And I think it just kind of depends on the image and what you're doing. So I don't think nostalgia is a bad thing at all. But I do think these processes are so wonderful because they, everybody's gum prints look a little different. Everybody's got a little bit of a different way of handling the material or the subject matter. And so I really think it pushes the photographic medium forward more than anything.
And no two anything are alike. It's
Right.
The making part.
Yeah.
Mark, what do you say?
It wasn't mentioned in my introduction, but since working at the George School, I've been at what used to be called the International Museum of Photography for the last 21 years. And working in a place that has over 4 million photographs and looking at lots and lots of photographs every single day, it's hard when you're doing a process that has has a certain look. It's hard to get away from that which might inspire you by looking at old photographs. I mean, because my talk dealt with collodion-based images, you see a lot of people making images with wet collodion tintypes, ambrotypes. And the funny thing about them is that in the 19th century, 98.99% of all ambrotypes were pictures of people cropped about this big and either looking this way or looking that way. And it's exactly what everybody's doing now. It's the same. They might think that it's a new approach, but in fact, it's actually exactly the same approach. It may not be in a skylight studio. I know that when I am inspired by imagery that is from the old days, that it's hard to exhibit pieces like that because people will say, oh, well, that's just like the old-fashioned pictures. And I would argue that that they are not anything like the old-fashioned. My work, while it's using a historic process, and collodion's my favorite. I work with other processes as well. And there's a lot of processes I work with and don't like for my own work. The hard part is taking something that is everyday and making it visually interesting. You can go to Egypt and take a picture of the Sphinx. And the trick is to show that picture of the Sphinx to people who live right next to the Sphinx and have them say, whoa, that's something different. If you take any picture of the Sphinx and go back to New Jersey or Missouri or New York, everybody's going to think it's interesting because they've never been to Egypt and seen the Sphinx. And so approach has so much to do with it. And even if you draw from subjects that are nostalgic, I mean, when I went to art school, people still painted apples. We still have apples. They had apples in the old days. The trick is to say something new. Can you really say something new and satisfy yourself first? That's where I'd leave it.
I think that's a great answer. And in continuing another thought, the advent of digital negatives has brought an explosion of new artists to historic process. I wondered if each of you could comment about that, and I guess I'll start with John this time.
Just for clarification, the question is, what about digital negatives?
Just that it has brought an explosion of new artists to historic process, whereas before it was sort of gate-kept by the analog community.
So I think I was talking to you, Holden, about just a mutual acquaintance who uses, you know, their existing equipment for a photo intaglio process, and I think for me, I really enjoy these cross hybridization of digital and analog because I think it's really democratizing, and there are some arguable differences in qualities, but I think my perspective is whatever works for the artist and whatever works for the way that they work and the equipment that they have is best. So I'm not someone who is like one size fits all about you know, pure digital versus pure analog. I think it's great when they mix.
Adam, what do you say?
I would agree with John with in the what he said about democratizing the people's access to photography. I think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I think when anything can be more accessible to people, more people are doing it, more people are trying it, more people are doing it in their own way. Again, it just pushes things forward. It makes things more interesting. It makes things more exciting, I think, for everybody. You know, I would also agree that I don't like when people say, well, this is the best way to do it, or this is the right way to do it, or this is the only way to do it. I think that those things are very, very limiting and very closed-minded, and maybe there's something that one person prefers, but that's, you know, that's different than saying this is the only way to do it. So I think being able to make digital negatives, you know, just for example, in teaching online right now, I can have students printing cyanotypes at home because they can print negatives at home. And even just on regular laser copy paper and do oiled paper. I mean, it just really makes it more accessible. I think anytime you can make something more accessible is good. So that's kind of my take on it.
Jill, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with Adam. I mean, especially, I mean, it's not just digital negatives on a transparency. It's also, you know, doing, you know, a gel medium and taking the paper off the back, or using tape, or there's no right way. And I think that the fact that we do have this digital way to output things, whether it be laser or inkjet, it's fantastic. And it's amazing how many wonderful things have happened because of this great, easy access that people now have. It's wonderful.
It has made, I think it's helped to make a lot of products more available because of the popularity. You can certainly get all kinds of things that you couldn't buy before you had to mix. Mark, what do you think?
You know, I hate to agree because it's I want to see some disagreement in this group, but it's so unusual to have so many people agree. But you know, at the museum, we teach 23 workshops a year in almost as many different processes. And the advent of the digital negative is a godsend. It is the future of alternative or historic printing processes. It's not some weird second cousin. It makes it possible to do some things that we never could do before. Think of doing 3-color or multicolor separations that we used to have to do with film. Now we do it with digital. It's so much easier. But just even one color, a negative for gum, a negative for albumin, a negative for carbon. I'm teaching carbon on glass next week. The other thing about it is, and people sometimes don't realize this, is that you cannot use the same negative to make a perfect gum print, to make a perfect albumin print, to make a perfect salt print, whatever, to make a high allotype albumin on glass. It just doesn't work. Each one is a different flavor, has a different density. And once you can wrap your head around how to craft a negative specifically for a designated printing process, that just opens up so many doors. So we love it at work. And we go the other direction as well. So making digital images from analog camera images.
Yeah, I think that that it's beneficial all around to be able to have a lot of options. Let's just put it that way. And yeah, the word democratize appeals to me quite a bit. I think that that's exactly what it does. And the next question leads right into that. The assumed difficulty and expense of alternative processes, or historic processes, leads some to call them elitist. The fact is that Van Dyke and cyanotype and salted paper and gum pipe chromate are all cheaper to produce than some prints on commercial silver gelatin paper, and are made with materials that are readily available and don't require a darkroom. And I'll start with you, Mark. Why don't you carry that thought?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Photography has never been for poor people. So I'll start with that. Maybe that'll create some controversy, but you have to have a camera in some cases. When it comes to historic processes or some of the new kind of spin-off processes, like lumen prints. Lumen prints are a form of printing out. It dates back to the earliest form of photography, and you can do it with dead paper, paper that you wouldn't use in a darkroom to develop. So there are cheap ways of doing things. Yes, you don't have to have a darkroom, really. A room that is darkened, but not necessarily a dark room. So yeah, it's the historic processes. If you go back far enough, well, I always wanted to have a class where I sent people to the supermarket and said, come back with 5 things you can make photographs with.
Wow.
And people could. There are things that either are scotophorous, they darken with light, or they bleach with light. Lots of things. I mean, Niepce's father showed him how to make images on peaches. So there's lots of things you can do that are inexpensive. It's not for everybody, though. Not everybody likes this sort of thing. There's a certain character that is intrigued by things that are light sensitive. I like the notion that there are people who are out there that are interested. Interested people are interesting.
I like it. John, I'm going to jump to you because we touched on this afternoon.
Yeah, so this is exactly, I certainly feel like an imposter on this panel as a relative newcomer to the medium, but I think the community work that the nonprofit that I'm involved in with Anna Lawrence and Donna Hendrick Moore. Donna especially has a lot of experience in these processes, but that's how I got involved in any of this community work was through because it was so kind of esoteric, hard to access. And that's one thing that I find appealing about some kinds of photography is that there is a kind of community around it because it is kind of hard to, the facilities are hard to come by, and it makes sense to collaborate and work with others. And so a big motivation of the collaborative group, the Big Camera, is to kind of introduce processes in context, especially where there maybe any kind of analog process is being eliminated. And so, I was a little bit defensive of nostalgia because that is a big motivator for me. And I think introducing the kind of magic developing image to maybe schools and programs where they're not any kind of dark room is phased out, and then otherwise that chance encounter may never happen to fall in love or not with it. Now, Mark, it's funny, my aunt came by and saw some of the lumen prints from the postcards for the pandemic, and she was like, I like this, but I'm not an artist. I just, it doesn't hold me like it would, but I have an artist friend who would love this, So there are people that are just would be hooked by it or not, but but yeah, I think funding is another thing for programming, and as digital is just so much easier, it's tempting for a lot of programs to no longer even offer any kind of non-digital process. So
I like that answer. Jill, what say you?
Well, it's interesting to hear what they're both saying, because I think digital is more expensive than any of these processes.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean, the computer, the scanner,
Mhm.
the printer, the ink, it's crazy, the expense. So that if we just used our cameras and film, or used our iPhone or a little camera, and then made the digital negative through a cheap laser print or through the gel medium, making a skin, or tape, uh, there are such cheap ways to do it. I think that doing anything, any of these historical techniques, even collodion is cheaper, I think. It's once you have the initial expense of getting the equipment together, but it lasts forever. I mean, think about how often you have to change your printer or your computer. I just had to buy a new computer, and it's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling how much all this stuff costs.
It's not really democratizing, is it?
Yeah, no. So I just think that there are ways to get around the expense, and more so when you're doing the historical techniques. And for me, it's more fun to have my hands in it. I like to have my hands getting wet. And I like going to the grocery store and saying, oh, you can use food grade gelatin. You don't have to buy expensive gelatin, or you can buy citric acid, or, hydrogen peroxide costs 69 cents. It's just, there's so many different things you can use. You just have to use your imagination or look in a book, and, and find how to do things so that you're able to create the way you want to create.
That's well said. Adam, what do you say?
Well, I would echo a lot of the things that were already said. I think it doesn't have to be very expensive. Yeah, there's things that you can get at the grocery store. I know working with students, they really love that magic of knowing, or when they find out that, you can make a camera out of a Quaker Oats tin or a shoebox. They never think it's going to work. They're absolutely amazed when they put that photographic paper in the developer and watch that image come out. Or developing film with coffee and citric acid and washing soda, things like that. They never think it's going to work. They just can't believe it, because it's just it's so everyday. So I think those kinds of things are really wonderful to get into, and it doesn't have to be so scary and limiting. So yeah, that's another reason why I love these processes. Just getting back to the kind of the last question, it just makes, there's so many things that are accessible if you look, as Jill said, to look in a book or ask a teacher or have somebody who can expose you to those things.
And this wasn't always the case. It used to be that learning about these processes was a very arcane and arduous task. And now this information is just out there. You can Google it instantly and get a recipe for Van Dyke Brown or whatever. And
Holden, I just want to point out something as I've been listening to people talk, that we used to use the term alternative process, and I never really understood what an alternative process was. What was it an alternative to? There are lots of things you can do to be creative, to make imagery using light sensitive materials. But a lumen, for instance, is not going to satisfy the desire to make a picture that has a full range of tones, that's camera based. People often, when they think of, oh, that old collodion process, it's so crunchy and it's got all those markings and it's primitive. But when it's done by somebody who actually controls the process, there is absolutely nothing primitive about the range of tones and the image quality. they're really, it's just your approach. So something like a lumen or working with juices of plants and things like that, while those have their own flavor, they are not an alternative to making a gelatin emulsion and making your own gelatin plates, which are now starting to catch on. Making, collodion negatives, making calotype negatives, all of the negative positive processes that involve an in-camera something, the primary image that's made in the camera, that can be extremely sophisticated, or you can play it more loose.
Yeah, as you point out, collodion can be an impeccably beautiful, perfect, surfaced rendering of the subject, or it can be full of dust smears and swirls and whatever else might occur.
Of course, and when you do it in a way that is perfect, it looks more like when you shot film that you bought from a store and put it in your camera. To me, that is a true alternative. It's an alternative to something that you used to buy, but now you can actually make it yourself, and there's no compromise in tonality and range of tones and that sort of thing.
I find that even with collodion, the surface look and densities are different in film in ways that are expressive and wonderful. I will say that there are all kinds of ways to work with these processes. My own particular way of saving money, since I took my first class from Jill at Penland, we learned how to make platinum prints. And they have these very, very expensive Epson printers that require 64 little ink cartridges, and they're all highly tuned, and they played, like a fugue, like you're playing a Bach fugue or something. And when I got home, I was like, "There's no way I'm going to buy one of these printers." So I started contact printing single weight silver gelatin positives onto X-ray film to make nice, dense, beefy negatives to do alternative process with, or historic process, mostly making calotypes. And it was certainly cheap. You can get a box of X-ray film for 100 sheets for $25. So there you go. And of course, people have been using printed positives as negatives since the calotype. So there you go. But that was my own way of sort of working around the exorbitant cost. That was my entry barrier. Was like, nope, not buying an Epson printer. Don't think so.
I'm sure that Joe would remember that, because we're about the same age, that whenever we wanted to do platinum prints or cyanotypes, the go-to film was just to buy ortho film, because it was really cheap. And depending on the developer, you could have a pretty continuous looking negative if you diluted the developer. You didn't have to have just black and just clear. But that used to be the go-to film for all of those processes.
Yeah, that's what I used first. Oh my God, the dust. The dust issue.
And scratches, right?
And scratches, yeah.
Very fragile.
Yeah, unless you had a big camera. I mean, I hated making negatives more than anything.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I didn't have my big camera that you see behind me at the time. So it was, I'm taking a 35 millimeter negative and trying to blow it up, and it just was like, ugh. It was awful.
Make an inner positive,
yeah. And then you would make a negative from that, or you.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was a lot of work.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah. So that's why I would take.
Consuming.
Yeah, that's why for me, just using like a thin single weight positive, was quick.
Yeah.
Quick way to get a negative.
Oh, those were the days.
Oh, those were the days.
Something I don't miss.
Here's another question out of left field, sort of. Alternative historic process practitioners often find the marketability of their work greater than traditional silver printing or other types of photographic printing. Do you think that the accessibility of historic process prints can often bridge people into other types of photographic work? In other words, sometimes they're the only work that people respond to.
I would say that one thing I hear from platinum printers a lot is, I can't believe people won't pay the price for my platinum print.
Wow.
And my answer is usually because the buyer does not care that that's a platinum print. You could spit out something on an Epson printer with a matte paper, and the buying public just wants to see the aesthetic of the image and the surface of the paper. I mean, if you have something that looks like a platinum print, they don't care if you give them the story that it's going to last for 1,000 years and the paper will rot before the picture does. It's all about the aesthetics of the print or the object, you know, if it's not a paper print, if it's something else. That's what I've seen in the last 10 years, particularly when it comes to people doing platinum. It's platinum palladium. And yet there's even a process that looks identical to it called the developed out salt print that you can make prints for pennies.
Wow.
And actually lasts longer than platinum prints.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
Go.
Invented in the 1850s. Nobody's doing it.
Everybody's taking notes tonight. They're like, developed out salt prints. Next week, you know. Jill, what do you think?
Look up Maxime Ducamp. The Egypt photographs. Blanchard Everard did the prints. Maxime Ducamp made the negatives. They're pictures of Egypt and Nubia. They're from the 1850s. I've never seen a faded one ever. And yet platinum prints, well, there was a conference 3 years ago in Washington to discover why platinum prints deteriorate.
Yeah, okay. Crisis. Yeah.
Right, figure that out, right?
Crisis. Jill, what do you think? Do alternative prints often open doors to for people who can't sort of see a good silver print in the right light?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel about that question. I think that for most people, well, I think that people that collect photographs do know the difference between what they're getting. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily care. I mean, look at all the 20 by 24 Polaroids that sold for thousands upon thousands of dollars, and they know they fade, but yet they still did get that money for those images. So I think that it just depends on who's buying. If someone just wants to buy a photograph because they like it, I don't think they care if it is platinum or cyanotype or digital with something on top of it. I don't think they really care. I think that they're doing it, they're buying it because they want the image, and yeah, they don't want to spend much money on it. So, you know, but I think that collectors know what the difference is and will spend the money for it.
That's true. Adam, what do you say?
Well, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that question. I guess I don't really know much about it, to be very honest. I also feel that I think people should collect artwork because they love the image, because they love what the work is saying to them, and that's where the value comes in. That's how I feel about it. That value comes from what a work of art makes you feel, how you relate to it, and that you want to look at it on your wall for a really long time. You want to see it every day, and it makes you think of something new, or you notice something different. And but I suppose that maybe. And I don't know if I'm interpreting your question correctly, but you know, maybe the accessibility of making things by hand for some people might get them interested in photography just in general. So I suppose it could act as a way of entering into the world of photography and appreciation for the craft of photography. Which I think is important. I think I would hope that people also appreciate the amount of work and time and artistry and craftsmanship that goes into making a photograph that you can hold in your hand.
John, what do you think?
I think the first thing that comes to mind with this question is just how the way that we value our sense of value attached to images is so different just because of how many images we encounter now. I think about myself, you know, if you have an Instagram account, how many images you have, and how many images are never printed at all. And so I do think there is a different kind of sense of excitement and sometimes and interest with something that's handmade in whatever degree. One, in terms of commercial viability, one thing that kind of comes to mind is we're talking about the how common, how much more common something like tintype has become. And I have an acquaintance who isn't doing this anymore, but had a really successful business, like going to tattoo conventions and taking tintype portraits that, you know, were kind of anachronistic. So, you know, I think there is a real allure to that can draw people into photography, and I do think we've become almost desensitized to imagery because of how much we filter through and see, and maybe it's not so different from the past. Maybe it's another false dichotomy, but I do think that it can have the power to pull people in more.
I think that's great. I'm sitting here reading some of the questions and having my mind blown completely. I'll just close with this thought, and then we'll take some of these questions because we've covered a lot of ground. Ansel Adams, you know, famously drew the analogy between music and the photographic process, in which the score represents the negative and the concert performance the final print. Historic processes can enhance the expressiveness of the performance, but they cannot rewrite the score. In other words, historic process can't replace good photography or interesting concepts. And I just wanted people to briefly talk about that. And I'll start with Mark.
I'd like to think I know what you're asking.
Okay.
So
Well, just
give me the cliff notes on that one.
Yeah, okay. The cliff note is that as I think we're circling back to where we started, where the process isn't the answer.
Okay.
You know, the process is the tool. It is not.
You know, I was just thinking of what John just said in conjunction with what you're saying now. He mentioned something about, well, now everybody's doing tintypes. It's really interesting. You know, when we first started teaching collodion processes back in, oh my God, in the 1980s, you could count on one hand how many people could make a tintype. And in those days, you could make a tintype and you could go into New York City to a gallery and say, well, here, look at this. And they'd look at it and they go tink, 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 and they, oh, it's on metal. And they'd never ask you about the body of work. Well, I mean, the really good galleries would, but they were so enthralled with the object. And we are too. That's one reason why we're attracted to it. And then after teaching and teaching and teaching and teaching and teaching so many workshops, we now have a situation where there are thousands and thousands of people making tintypes and ambrotypes and all of the collodion-ish things. And you know, what I realize now is that we weren't ever going to get to the point where we saw interesting images until the galleries responded with, so what?
Right.
I mean, 30 years ago, if Jill and I went into a gallery in New York City and said, you know, we do black and white prints from 35 millimeter or 2 1/4 or 4 by 5 inch negatives, the answer would have been, so what?
Right.
And yet there are many, many, many galleries, and there are lots of shows all over the country that are still enthralled with seeing something they've never seen before. And so a lot of imagery gets on the walls that if it was a scanned image or a silver gelatin or anything else, you'd never look twice at it. And the reason why it's getting attention is because it's something that's intrinsically interesting. The materials are interesting. And I think the hope for not just self-expression, because self-expression is a different thing. If you're making images just to express yourself, the sky's the limit. But if you want to say something important in your artwork, say something important in your artwork. You know, choose the process that you think contributes the most to your artwork, and then don't talk about it anymore.
Right.
No?
Let people see
Right?
it.
And if a gallery doesn't say, so what, that's not, you know, you're going to get a pat on the back for a while, but it's not really, it's not going to last, it's not going to hold. You want the gallery owner, or you want the people who are buying your work to ask you about the imagery. That's what you want to talk about. You want to say why it's important to you, not, oh, and then I pour this on here, and then I cut glass, and it's really dangerous. You know, they don't want to hear that crap. At least if they do want to hear that crap, go to another gallery.
Right, right. Jill, what do you think?
Well, I think that is going full circle on what we originally started talking about, which is it is not about the process. It has to be about the image.
Right.
And for me, I love working with my hands. I love playing around with it. I love getting something different. I love where I think it's important to learn how to control something, and then you can break all the rules or not. I just think I think in photography, we talk a little bit too much about process, and it needs to be about images and about what are you trying to say, and what is your work about, and why are you doing this work. And so I just, I don't know. I love, I never did just like, even when I was just shooting black and white, I wasn't just shooting black and white. I was mostly shooting infrared film. I like to be able to have my hand in everything a little bit more than just pushing the button. But that's not for everybody. I mean, look, you know, as John said, look at all the images on Instagram. It's like, oh my God, you know, it's enough to shoot yourself with. How many, you know, pictures of, I mean, and yet I have 1,500 images on my phone of my animals. I mean, so
I
it's,
love my iPhone.
yeah, I love it. I do. I love my iPhone. So I actually just did a whole series when, you know, I never commuted before. I always walked, you know, 15 minutes to Parsons from my apartment. And then 6 years ago, we moved up to the Hudson Valley. And now all of a sudden, until March, I was on a train, you know, a couple of times a week. And so I took my iPhone and I shot pictures out the window. And then I come back and I do something else with them, you know, which I still don't know what I'm going to do with them, what the finished series will look like. But I keep trying different things to see how I want them to look in the end. But it started with my iPhone. So
Well, yeah, but like with Mark's recent anatomy project and your immigration project, I think they also start with a passion and a core feeling, you know, and that all the work emanates from that core feeling, you know. The immigration work you did, really powerful. The final conceptual piece was really powerful. Mark's images for anatomy were breathtakingly beautiful, and the amount of emotion and feeling that he had about the work was in the work, you know. And so I think that that's a thing that we all look for. Adam, what do you think about all this?
Well, I use that quote from Ansel Adams in my classes, and to me, what he is talking about there is craft. And so, you know, one of the things I think is interesting to ask is, well, I think students want to know. I come at this a lot from an instructor as well, particularly with what we're talking about, I guess. So that's why I kind of keep coming back to that. Is, you know, how do you make better pictures? I mean, why take a photography class? That's what you're there for. So what I always tell them, and I'm only half joking, is that to make a more interesting picture, you have to be a more interesting person. You know, it starts with you. You have to be curious. You have to want to learn things. You have to be an interesting person first. But then you have to have an understanding. It helps to have an understanding of the camera. It helps to have an understanding of how to, you know, what you want to photograph, how to use your materials. But then you can manipulate the image further, which to me is what Ansel was talking about there, is that it begins with the negative. It begins with having an interesting image, which means being an interesting person and have something interesting to say, but that you also can manipulate that image further, that it doesn't just end with the negative. And I think that there is more to really, I think there's more to great craftsmanship than, beautiful, perfect tonality and, really clean images. I think that craftsmanship can also just mean purposeful, careful action on the image. Craftsmanship can sometimes look really messy, in my opinion. This is just how I think about it, but it's something that is purposeful, and as long as you are doing things that are sort of meant to be there, and sometimes that serendipity comes in, and I think that can be that is maybe sometimes kind of annoying to people if that's what you're relying on, because you have no control of the image. But I guess that's kind of what I think Ansel is talking about, and I would agree with that. I like the idea that you can manipulate so many things about an image, from before you take it to while you're, the negative. You can manipulate the printing, even the exhibition of the print. So that's kind of how I think about that, and as it relates to craft.
John, take us home.
I guess when you were talking, when y'all were speaking, I was thinking about situations in which the history of the process might be important to the image, and I think especially with historic processes, when the subject is history, something related to history itself, that can totally change or transform the meaning of the work. But another thing that came to mind, and I'm probably about to butcher a quote from Andy Warhol, but it's something to the extent of like, when you're looking at a work of art, you should get the sense that the artist had fun making it, or they're not going to have any fun if they don't. And it's not all, fun is maybe not exactly the right word, but if you're not interested in and intrigued by the process itself, you're not going to be motivated to stick with it. So I think that is enjoyment process can't be the whole story. It doesn't make a good work, but you're not going to keep making work if you hate everything about the process. And so,
amen to that. Yep. Bryce, you got questions for us?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I'm amazed to observe that Adam is somehow able to be in this conversation, and yet he's also responding to folks who are sending stuff in via the chat, which is a little confusing because there are a ton of questions that have come in via the chat and a handful on the Q&A. But while I'm deciphering those, I have to do this. I love the conversation about the process and you guys that teach and quotes. I just wanted to share a quote that I used in some of my classes from Edward Weston, when it was about, good galleries, people are going to stop being seduced by, oh, it's this weird process. But I love this, man is the actual medium of expression, not the tool he elects to use as a means. Results alone should be appraised. The way in which these are achieved is of importance only to the maker. To the extent that the completed work realizes depth of understanding, uniqueness of viewpoint, and vitality of presentation, will the spectator respond and participate in the original experience. And to me, I think that's a lot of what I'm taking from what you guys are saying. Like, again, the process is the tool, but the work is not about the process. It's about what the human behind that is doing and expressing. And, when you can get over the gimmick of the process, you get to the core of the real work. So there are a bunch of questions, and Holden, I'm gonna throw out one. If you want to look through maybe the chat and Q&A, see if there's one you want to ask, but I'll ask one that I really thought was rather delightful and a little lighthearted, maybe a good way to pull in audience questions. They were sort of joking, and I think it was from Stephen Fletcher, our own team member. He was sort of joking that early on, as all this stuff was being developed, the creator of the process could just slap their own name/type onto the process. Daguerreotype, calotype, whatever. And his question is sort of, have any of you guys sort of stumbled upon an accidental process of your own during your creation that we should be looking for an Osterman type or an Enfield type or something accidental that you went, hey, this, I didn't mean to do this, but this kind of works. And maybe I'll try to do more of this. Any happy accidents in your?
There have been lots of things that are variants of a process.
Right.
But not really new. And people are still naming process. I love when people call tin types alumatypes because they're doing them on aluminum. But even though the original tin type has no tin, they're made on iron. And I don't know. There's a lot of people that want to name a process, but I actually kind of hate the hyphenated photography. Anytime you put a prefix on it, but you are right. The daguerreotype and actually the calotype was the Talbot type. Calotype is another term for it, but only variants of processes. Things, techniques, and I'm sure Jill probably has a lot of the same. You come up with something slightly different, or maybe use a different material, but it's the same there are only so many processes, and then just variants of those processes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I mean,
I tend to forget what I did. Like I'll be in the darkroom and I'll just, I'll be careful I don't mix, things with the wrong acids or whatever. But I do tend to throw things around a lot, and then it's like I can't repeat it.
So you're not tempted. So if you print out a Xerox and then do a cyanotype on top of that, you're not tempted to call it a cyanox.
No, it's not worth renaming. I mean, even in the museum, when I work with conservators to help them to identify peculiar processes,
right.
I just lump them all as obscurotypes.
Now, that's
I like that name.
I love that name.
Staying power. Yeah,
that's a good name.
Obscurotype.
I have a whole exhibit of those.
Yeah, that works.
It works.
That's very funny.
I actually bought a tintype today. This morning, somebody had it on Craigslist that it was a tintype in a frame, and on the back it said it was a silver type, and all it was a tintype that they hadn't varnished, and they rubbed the entire thing to make it look shiny.
Oh wow!
Yeah, silver type, patented.
I'm
sure it wasn't. No.
Yes.
Adam, you got any patents out there for any happy discoveries?
No.
John, no. Okay. Holden, have you found? There's a bunch of good questions, honestly, you guys, and not a ton of time. We want to keep going, but a lot of stuff about some of the references you guys gave us. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
There it is.
There's some people who are curious about the printed out salt prints you mentioned and some other sources, and of course, I know you guys have books of your own. But maybe when we post all this on Facebook, if you guys want to give people some resources there, rather than maybe.
The thing is that I have the resource of the George Eastman Museum.
Right.
And so any journal that was ever published in 5 languages, I can go up there and read it. Now, there are many more things online than there were when I started learning and when Jill started learning. So there are doors that are open now. But essentially, the developed out salt print is just like a regular salt print, except you can't coat it in the daylight. You have to coat it under safe light, and then you use developer. That's the easiest way I can describe it. But it's developed out and not printed out, and the image is more neutral tone. It's a great process. Look up Blancart Evrard or Maxime Decamp.
I know there are a lot of folks asking about autochromes and all kinds of little technical stuff, but Holden, did you find any particular question in there you wanted to?
I think that there are a lot of technical questions, and what I want to do, I think, is keep the conversation aesthetic more than technical. I think we're here to talk about aesthetics, and I want to start out firstly by thanking all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to show up here. I know even during the pandemic that everybody has things to do. And I want to remind everyone watching that Mark and Jill and Adam and John are all photo educators, and they all offer classes in some way, shape, or form, and you can find out about that by directly contacting them. If you'd like to learn more about processes in general, Jill has a wonderful book that you can buy anywhere, and some people on this panel have photographs in that book that shall remain nameless. Adam. I will ask one question.
Wait, before you do, let me also give a shout out to John. He is the representative of the Big Camera Project here for the Click Photo Festival with the big camera. Tomorrow is the last day he's going to be in town. We've had a beautiful weather. It's a big, spacious, spread out warehouse with this great camera obscura. John's going to try to bust out of here to go home mid-afternoon. So it'll be your last chance to come see the Lumen stuff that we've been doing here and that he brought with. And it's been great having him here. I wish we were able to have more physical contact. So I appreciate him and his team making all the extra effort to actually come here in person.
And yeah, I'll just kind of promote the postcards for the pandemic project. So it's photo postcards, but we have hundreds of participants, hundreds of Lumen prints, and it's kind of trying to respond to how to reach people, how to do photo outreach with a pandemic condition, and in the most kind of democratizing way that we could find. And it was lots of hours of work with my collaborators, Donna Moore and Anna Lawrence. So yeah, it will be up tomorrow at the Durham Fruit Company and Camera Obscura as well. That is really turned out better than I had even hoped. So yeah, definitely check it out if you're in Durham.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Holden, take us out of here with the last question here.
I just wanted to ask each person, for anybody who hasn't done it, where a good starting point is. What's a good starting place? This will be the only question I'll ask tonight. And I'll start with Jill.
My book, of course.
Oh, of course. I should have known.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got a copy somewhere. I could hold it up.
Oh, I can.
All right. You do that. May as well.
There it is.
Yeah, look. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So it's a good book.
Big fat book.
Easy to read and easy to find information. The other thing is for people that are interested in old books, The Silver Sunbeam is a great book. And it has some of the processes that Mark mentions, because it's hard to read because it was written in the 1800s. And I think that it's a little difficult to understand, but the recipes are there and it works. And so, in fact, one time, I'll just say real fast, when I had gotten red silver and I didn't know why I got red silver, I found it in the Silver Sunbeam.
Yeah.
And I found out how to correct it. So, I mean, it's a terrific little book to have, and you can get it on, you can find it on eBay and stuff. And the other thing is workshops. Holden,
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark teaches them too. And, they're just, the workshops are just, they're so fun. And of course now they're online, and Mark and I were talking about it the other day, how much more work it is to do them online, but they're available and there's no reason to not. This is a perfect time to get started with this stuff or to continue. You're stuck at home. What else are you going to do?
That's right. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with Jill. I mean, get the books. There are lots of books. Jill's book. There are lots of books out there, but there are also the old books. The old books are harder to understand. I can tell you that. They have strange notations like QS, quantity sufficient, means just enough. And then, of course, tutorials and the way we're doing our work now. I said before, we canceled 23 workshops.
Wow.
And because of the work that I did for the museum for so many years, we essentially teach a lot of the processes that other people don't, or we were the source where people learn the process, and now there are other people teaching processes. So if you want something really obscure, like the very first process with asphalt by Niepce, we teach that. We teach albumin on glass, all the collodion processes, collodion paper, gelatin emulsions. My partner, Nick Brandreth at the museum, taught a Lippmann plate workshop yesterday. So full color photographs with no color. Unbelievable process. So seek out the people who are teaching or have been teaching and now are not making the money they did when they were teaching every day. We need you to come to us, and you don't have to take a workshop for us to answer your questions. I know that Jill and my wife France and I answer questions all the time free of charge. Just email us, and then we'll try to twist your arm to take an online tutorial, or if you have a few friends, put together a workshop. But all of the information is out there for the most part. There's somebody doing some process that you'd like to learn. And we can even tell you how to start out with virtually nothing. Go to the grocery store. It doesn't have to be something complicated.
Let's go to Adam.
Well, I also would agree that books are the best place to go. That's where I got started. Jill's book was the first edition, was one of the first books that I had and how I got started. So I can vouch for that very much. And doing workshops, that's also a really great way to go. I think if people are looking maybe for a suggestion for maybe a first process to start with, I always like to joke that cyanotype is sort of the gateway drug to alternative process. It's the most, in my opinion, the most versatile and most accessible. You can do it with friends. It's easy to get. And pretty soon you get yourself more and more hooked, and you find yourself by yourself making daguerreotypes somewhere. But cyanotype is, I think, a good way to start. But definitely books and workshops are very, very helpful. So. And yeah, ask us questions. I know. I would also agree with Mark, and I know Jill. I know Mark's answered a lot of my questions before, and so is Jill probably too. But I'm more than willing to, email us and see where it goes from there. I just want to add, since I would be remiss if I did not also say that the Hand magazine might be a good place to start. There are a lot of different processes in there, and we have a glossary in the back that describes a lot of the processes. So hopefully that could be a resource for people as well.
Certainly a great place to have your work seen by a larger audience,
That too.
Yeah, no, it's great. I still actually ask Mark questions when I need them. Mark and France answer me all the time.
John, what do you think?
I mean, nothing outside of what's already been said. I mean, certainly, speaking of democratizing or not, the expense of going to a place like Pinland or Aramont can be prohibitive. But if you can get a grant or a scholarship, that can be a great way to go about things. But for me, my entry point in a lot of ways has been kind of interacting with community, with people in my area who are kind of local experts and mentors, and becoming involved and sharing person to person. And hopefully we'll get to a point where that becomes not so difficult in the near future, but everything else y'all have mentioned as well, of course.
Well, I want to just give that a thumbs up there, John, because everybody in their own hometown, and that's sort of our mission here with Click, is that often we gather in a physical space near one another, but our hope is that we're building a community and a network, but now we can connect people wherever they are and still feel like we are a community that can reach out to one another, and it's just great to have that sense of support.
Can I add to that, Bryce? I like that you brought up the idea of community. I think one of the things about these processes is that it really has made a community out of people who might normally be by themselves in front of a computer screen or in a dark room somewhere. And I think that it has brought people together. Social media and the way that things work now through technology has also helped that a lot. But I think the fact that we are able to share a lot of our notes and different things that we do, and I think that community is a really, really important and vital part of what we're doing with all the different ways of making photographs that we're all involved with. So it's great to be a part of that community, and I would encourage people to get into that. And there's a lot of really great
I
people.
think we're still voting on your membership, Adam. I think the jury's still out on you. I don't know. No, we're glad to have all of you here. Yeah.
And another thing is, after the last great pandemic, there were the Roaring 20s. So we have something to look forward to.
Hurrah!
I kept thinking this was going to be the Roaring 20s. Boy, was
Yeah,
I
well,
wrong,
In a few years.
huh? In a few years
give it a while.
from your lips.
All right. I think, Holden, I think that's a pretty good.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for taking time to be here, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to talk with you all this evening.
Absolutely. Can't
Thank
thank you guys enough. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Everybody, audience, good night.